Hey everybody, PKFT1 here, and I am here back with the promised Like a Dragon Ishin video that I told you guys that I was going to do. So, let's talk about this game a little bit. It's been out for, maybe 2 weeks now? I don't remember exactly how long it's been. However, I've been slowly making my way through this game, and I've been having a pretty good time with it. This is, if you're not aware, which I don't know why you wouldn't be aware of this, but as we all know, this is a remaster of the original Yakuza Ishin, which I believe came out in 2014. And I'm not sure if it came out both on PS3 and PS4, or if it was just like a PS3 title in Japan, because it never came out here to the West. So this is the first time it's released to the West. And one interesting aspect about this game is the fact that it was redone in the Unreal Engine. And I'll kind of get into talking about that a little bit and how I think that helps this game but also hinders this game in a few different ways. However, I will say this is a really fun title. If you've played all the other Yakuza games and you want something different that's a little more fresh than what you're used to, this isn't necessarily going to ring all those bells. It's not like a brand new, totally new experience. But the fact that the setting is in the late 1800s and the fact that you have items in this game like swords and guns and all that, it does make the combat a little bit different. So let's talk a little bit about how I feel overall of the game. Overall, I'm pretty positive on the game. I think it's a fun addition to the Like a Dragon or Yakuza franchise. I guess we're now going to transition into calling it Like a Dragon. I've been calling it Yakuza for so many years. It's going to be really hard to get over that. Let's talk about the story. So, as you all know, of course, you have this large cast from all of the previous games, kind of an ensemble cast of some fan favorites, and the story is pretty simple. Without getting into too much, Kiryu's character, who is named Ryoma in this game, is after the killer of his father figure. And that's kind of the base of what this whole story hinges on, which is which of the members of the Shinsengumi clan, or whatever the correct term for it is the killer. And the way he narrows this down is from this fighting style. I think they call it like Tenin Rishin or something like. I don't know exactly how it's pronounced. Forgive me for my mispronunciation. But I find that to be a pretty compelling and simple aspect of the story to go off of. And so even though it can get a little bit complicated in all of the lingo that they use, and since all of these characters are basically sitting in places of fictional characters, they all are renamed. So it can be difficult for me to keep all of their names straight in accordance with like their faces, because I'm thinking of their names from the Yakuza franchise, but they've all been assigned new names in this game. And I'm not sure if any of these characters are actually historical figures or not. I thought I read something, but maybe I'm thinking about Kenzan. I don't even know. Regardless, I really like that simple story. And so it makes for a fun mystery as you are trying to figure out which one of these guys is actually the killer. And let's talk about the cast while we're at it. So the cool thing about this game, like I said, is that it features all sorts of characters from the past. The ones that I'm particularly excited about being in here, as I'm sure many others are the three lieutenants from Yakuza 0. Of course, you've got Nishiki in there. You've got Ryuji in there. You've got all the fan favorites like Akiyama and the Florist and Date. Basically, everybody who's, really iconic, including Haruka, in the Yakuza franchise is in this. Saejima, you name it. But then there's some, faces from past games that you haven't really either seen in a long time or only ever made an appearance once. Particularly with a lot of the side characters, you'll see some familiar faces, Like, I believe there's a part where you run into Sarah from Yakuza 0 and Yakuza Kiwami or 1. And then you'll have, like I said, characters like the Florist who make a brief appearance. I believe one of the guys is one of the villains from Yakuza 3 who's in the Shinsengumi. You have some guys from Yakuza 5 in there. I don't remember all of their names because it's been a while. But regardless, it spans quite the gamut, including Yakuza 7 characters, which I think is really fun because you get to see these characters interact in a fashion that you would never get to see them interact, through any of the other games, because either they're dead or they just weren't around in the same game. So that's a really fun aspect about this game, especially for the fan favorites like Kuze. Just to see him on screen again is a lot of fun. I'm actually at a point in the game where I haven't had that many interactions with him. I feel like I'm pretty far in the game. I assume there will be a point where maybe we'll have more of a meaningful interaction, but I will say it's probably hard to balance the actual relationships with all the characters considering the cast is so big. However, you get to fight most of these guys in a really fun way. So I've really enjoyed that aspect. One thing that some people might not be that hot on, but I feel like probably most people are excited about this, is there are cast members from the original Ishin who've been replaced with newer characters. Particularly those from like 0 and 7. That being said, I haven't played the original, so I can't really sit here and reminisce about the old version. I just know a few faces have been changed up. But I haven't really heard any complaints about that. And one of the other cool things about this game is the fact that, again, it's in 1860s or maybe it's 1880s Japan. So it's completely different in terms of the class system. And you get to see kind of these characters placed in these different positions of power, how they interact with those around them, kind of the old codes that they used to run by, much like the Yakuza. Who gets respect, who doesn't. And of course there's a whole samurai aspect of it, which is just cool. So everything kind of feels like a Kurosawa film with a Yakuza flair. People still interact much like they do in the Yakuza titles. However, you will run around the city and hear people you'll read the subtitles and see people are speaking with, I guess, what the localizations team idea of what a rural Japanese accent would be, which is kind of every now and then I feel like I see British slang, but I feel like sometimes I see American Southern slang. Maybe I'm misremembering, but that seems to be kind of the way people talk. Another cool thing I like about this is you run into a lot of foreigners. Sometimes one guy is a cowboy and he teaches you, how to use your revolver, and you can work with him. And of course, you'll run into other foreigners along the way. And you have all these different teachers who kind of basically have their own dojo where you can learn about the different styles that you're given. And let's just get into that. So you have 4 styles in this game, and those styles are somewhat similar to each other depending on which ones you're choosing. So you have the, I'm going to misremember the name, but the dancer style, which you have the sword and the gun. You have the gunslinger one where you just have the gun. And then you have your brawler style, which is your classic brawler style from all the Yakuza games. And then you have your swordsman style. To me, if I'm not mistaken, it seems like the further you get in the game, the more you upgrade your equipment, which I must emphasize is a very important part of this game. If you are not updating or upgrading your equipment, it's going to get really tedious killing these guys. And you're not going to be doing nearly as much damage if you're not paying attention to what you have equipped. And you're going to be taking a lot more damage if you don't have the right equipment equipped for defense. So sometimes you'll pick up weapons from certain battles, because a lot of times I just look at my inventory and I would just be like, oh, I have a sword that does twice the damage that I had before, and I didn't even realize it. Because I was planning on going and upgrading it, but I found out that somehow I had acquired a stronger weapon just from progression of either the story or just running into some sort of fight, and I got some cool weapon. So I actually haven't had to do that much upgrading myself. I've upgraded the gun more, and I've seen that that does significant damage. Between the gun and the sword, you can just rack up so much damage that it almost makes the brawler style feel completely and totally useless. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong. Perhaps I am. But I'm, probably about 30 hours in or so. And the brawler style, to me, unless I'm doing a heat action, I'm not really getting much out of it. I feel like I'm just beating on these guys for like 10 minutes before I actually kill them. These will be just like the bottom of the barrel guys you run into, let alone the actual, boss enemies and encounters. So that's been a bit of a struggle for me. I felt like the styles kind of were pretty level at first, but then at some point, once I upgraded my equipment, using my sword or gun just got so far above and beyond. I mean, plus the gun you can use at a range, so it's there's a lot of exploits. Which, don't get me wrong, Yakuza, there's always usually a style I prefer, but in this case, I found myself really focusing on the sword style and the gunslinger, and a little bit of the dancer style. That one's pretty fun just to play. The brawler style, I wish it was more powerful. I know you can upgrade its level a little bit through your abilities upgrades, but it never seems to quite cut it for me. Like, it's not upgrading it enough to where it feels useful by the time I'm this far in the game. So I should say the game, it feels a little bit unbalanced, but I could be doing something wrong. However, there is if I'm not mistaken, I think this is a new addition. I don't know if it was present in the old game or not, and that is the Trooper card system. So when you go to the Shinsengumi hideout, which you eventually join in the game, or not really hideout, I don't know what you'd call it. It's basically their little base that they all meet at. I know there's a term for it. The lingo and language and everything kind of it has a way of not being able to stay in my mind unless I'm reading it on screen. I think because there's just so many Japanese words that I have a hard time keeping all the words straight and names straight, especially when it comes to locations. So there's this a place you can go where you're sent in and you do these various missions for the Shinsengumi, and the idea is that you're leading your troop through these small little dungeons, and it's a good way of finding gear and leveling up a little bit. But there's this thing called Trooper cards, which are basically cards that are assigned to your different styles. And think of them as special abilities that you can call on once you've racked up enough damage with each style. Some of them will give you health benefits. Some of them will give you, I think one of them gives you defense benefits. I don't know. And then others are special attacks, which are usually what I, default to using. And some of those attacks are really cool. Now, the thing about it when I played, and I assume it's like this with every copy of the game, you can basically get some free Trooper cards right from the beginning that are already level 99. And it threw me off really far because it's all these random YouTubers or influencers or whatever who got their own specialized cards. I guess they're all people who play the games. One of them is Kenny Omega, who's a wrestler, and they all have special abilities, and they're already leveled to 99, so I just had to go to the PlayStation Store, download them for free, equip them to whatever style I wanted to, and I can call on those abilities anytime I want, and they seem way more powerful than the ones that I, had by default. I'm sure there's, various ones that are great once you level up your default troops that you can acquire throughout the game. A lot of times you run into these troops in just like random encounters you have in the streets. You beat them, one of them will offer to join your team. And again, these aren't actual troops who travel with you. They're just cards. And I do enjoy that aspect because it adds this like level of, craziness to the game. It's very fantastic. You're using these like mystical abilities that, don't really make any sense in context of the world, but because it's Yakuza, it's just goofy, so you have these like magical powers you can call upon, which is a lot of fun. I mean, I guess it's not that much more crazy than some of the Heat actions that are out there. It kind of reminds me of Yakuza 7, all the special abilities that you could... I mean, with the turn-based combat, you had a lot crazier moves and stuff, and since it was all in the imagination, I felt like the ridiculousness level of those combat situations kind of contextualize themselves because they're all in Ichiban's brain. Whereas in this, it doesn't really... There's no context for it as far as I can tell. Kiryu can just shoot these fireballs, which is cool. I don't care. I just think it's a fun addition, assuming it is an addition. But I don't want to get hung up on that too much. But those abilities can really help you when you're stuck in a certain situation. Like, for instance, there's one sub-story where you have to escort this guy, and it's his daughter, and they're being carried around, or his daughter's being carried around in this, like, they call him, like, I don't know how you actually pronounce the word, pelican? Anyhow, it's one of those things that basically, think of it like a little box that they carry around, and they sit people inside it, and they can transport you places. Like an old school taxi, essentially. Anyhow, you have to escort this guy and his daughter from getting attacked by all of these NPC enemies who come out of nowhere. And you actually have to fight them all off without them attacking it, to the point that it loses so much health that you lose the mission and you have to redo it. And it was a real pain in the butt for me. I don't know why. I think I was just too low level at the time, or my weapons weren't doing enough damage. So I was just getting so overwhelmed with everything. But then I realized, okay, well, if I really take advantage of these trooper cards, I can do all these like AoE attacks that are really going to help me out. So once I equipped those, it really helped me with that mission, made things a lot easier. So yes, in specific situations, it can be very, very helpful. However, they're definitely not something you need to complete the game, at least in my opinion. You can definitely beat this game without the help of any trooper cards. I really don't think they're essential, but if you just want to breeze through stuff, they're very helpful. Okay, enough about that. So I've talked a lot about the styles. I've talked a little bit about the cast. Some other things that are in this is there's this thing called the virtue system. And I feel so-so about the virtue system. I like it in the sense that it gives me an incentive to do these sub-stories aside from just cold hard cash. But it can also be sometimes tedious unless you know what activities really can, like, build up your virtue. Like, for instance, you would think that going around and, like, taking care of thugs on the street would really build up your virtue quite a bit, particularly the ones where you actually have to, like, stop and engage with them rather than just the random encounters. However, I found that at least later in the game, doesn't really bring too much virtue to you. Sub-stories can do that, but I found that, like, unless you're really completing, like a larger task or a longer sub-story, you don't really seem to get that much virtue from it, as far as I can tell. But all the stuff in, what's it called, like the On the Homestead minigame, where basically you help Haruka to maintain this house that she grew up in, and there's all sorts of tasks that you can do there, which includes, like, maintaining a garden, fulfilling orders, cooking. Like, that stuff seems to give you a lot of virtue. And I think the chicken races can give you a lot of virtue as well, where you can really farm for it. And that gives you access to the shrines that you can upgrade all sorts of things with. You can get some of the better items and better abilities, I guess I would say. Or features unlocked in certain types of areas of the game, like fishing and, again, on your homestead. So your virtue can unlock all of those things, which is nice. And I think it's kind of a fun twist on, the system at play, just because it makes sense in the context that, you're in a fairly small town, at least as opposed to, or in comparison to, the modern cities that you inhabit in Yakuza games. So your reputation makes a lot of sense, especially being part of the Shinsengumi. And I kind of like that. It does remind me a little bit of like CCP social credit stuff, but in the context of a video game, it's fun and it does make sense contextually. So I think overall, I find myself putting more stake into spending my virtue than I do into the actual money. Because so much of that can go to upgrading things and helping out with things that get me more out of the game, I feel, particularly on the homestead. Because a lot of times I'm just valuing what's going to sit in my inventory and be useful to me. I guess I could buy stuff from ye old Don Quixote, but more times than not, I'm just going to cook stuff because it's going to replenish my health a lot more, and so I feel like it's worth the time to sit there and cook. So if I have more vegetables, I have more recipes to cook, the more interest I'm going to have in exploring that. Or fishing. Like, I wanted to get one of the cats as a pet. The black cat, the hungry cat that you run into, there gets to a point where you have to go and get him a tuna. And it took me forever, for whatever reason, because I was going about it the wrong way, to figure out how to get the peerless pole, which, again, you need virtue to get. And then you need to get, a bunch of experience or virtue in order to get the, different types of expertise. And then you can go and fish, and you can get the tuna fairly easily from there. So I definitely feel that virtue is something that I focused on more. Anyhow, let's move on. One thing, this is a little bit of a complaint. Not like a huge complaint or anything game-breaking. It's just, I find that it seems that there is a bit of a lack of mini-games in this game as compared to some of the previous Yakuza titles, and it's understandable. By all means, this seems to be a bit of a lower-budget project, much like the Kiwami titles, from what I understand. So this doesn't have as many mini-games in it. It has a lot of the staples, so a lot of the gambling. Of course, karaoke is in there. There's a dancing mini-game. Like I said, cooking. Cooking is its own mini-game. There's the chicken races. So there is, it's, fair share of fun stuff. But in comparison to maybe what you might be used to, especially if you're coming off of like a dragon, you might be a little bit disappointed. However, the minigames to me aren't really a focus in this one. To me, it's more about the story, and so I've enjoyed that. I've already told you how much I just like having some sort of subsection of the game that I can focus time into. So, like, the Real Estate Royale in Yakuza 0 was one of my favorite mini-games. I spent so much time just doing that. Or even the Hostess Club mini-games. I like how much time you can put into those and feel rewarded, not just with, the cash or whatever that comes from it, but just seeing the progress and just seeing how the sub-story that goes along with that mini-game progresses. In this case, and this is not nearly as in-depth as those, I struggle to even say it's a mini-game because it's not really. It's that on the homestead thing. Where you can build up your house, you can get pets, you can cook stuff. Every now and then you'll get some little cutscenes with Haruka. I've at least had one like sub-story that popped up from just doing one task enough. Of course, there's the whole fulfilling deliveries thing. I assume there's probably some sub-stories that might connect to that as well. But I like the farming part too. It's really simple. All you do is like place some vegetables there. But anytime that they have any little extra things like that, I get a kick out of it. So while it isn't as in-depth as other Yakuza games, you know, there's a bit to do. And if you spend time doing it, you'll probably find at least one or two things that you like doing on the side. I usually don't explore the gambling minigames. In this case, I did, and I found myself losing a whole lot of money on the really simple... I forget what the game is called, but in the gambling den, where there's the game with the dice, and you basically just predict if it's going to be odd or even. I found that to be a really fun one that I spent a lot of time doing and lost like 15,000 doing, but that's neither here or there. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of aspects of the game. One thing I want to talk about that's probably one of the more interesting aspects of this game is the fact that they tried to switch to Unreal Engine for the development of this game. Now, I don't know all the reasons for this. I don't really know a whole lot about game development. I have a theory as to why they may have done it, but to me, this game, especially in comparison to Yakuza Kiwami 2, it does feel like a downgrade. Not in like a horrible way, because, you know, the bones of it are still there. It's obviously more, I would say it leans more towards a remaster, like a remaster with like extra content than like a full-on remake. Because you think about Yakuza 2, you think about Kiwami 2. I mean, that's from the ground up a remake. This seems to be using a lot of the old textures, gameplay mechanics, old models and stuff like that, but obviously there's been an upgrade to the visual fidelity in a lot of places too, the lighting system, all that. So I feel like the cutscenes all look great. However, there are definitely some parts of this game where you can see the jank. And again, this is based on a game from 2014, so it's not like it's all that surprising, and it's not game-breaking or anything either. Well, I should say it is in some cases, but I think they may have patched a lot of those issues out just recently. I had a few times where this game just crashed on me completely, and it would be with something as innocuous as just like a random encounter. In fact, I think one time it was and it was that mini game I was talking about where you have to escort that girl and her father. And I failed the mini game, and for whatever reason, once I failed, it just crashed. So there are some places like that at least I found it to be a bit buggy. I feel like I see a lot more visual glitches than I ever have. Like, I've seen parts where I'm, like, talking to people and there's no one actually there. Their model's, like, invisible. Or at least, like, you know, 90% of their model is invisible except for, like, parts of their feet. I don't know why that's happened to me. You have a lot of those issues with pop-in, with people in the background, as well as just like textures. You'll see it a lot on like the ground when you're loading into a new area. It reminds me a lot of the controversy around Final Fantasy VII Remake and the pop-in with that door. If any of you guys remember that, it reminds me a lot of that. So I feel like this game is definitely rough around the edges. However, that's not to say that this game is, you know, terrible looking, because again, a lot of the cutscenes look fantastic, and as far as I know, they're running in real time. From what I can tell, it's just like a much higher fidelity scene with, you know, better motion capture, face capture, all that. One thing that I was going to say though is I find it interesting that as you look at these characters, you got to think about the characters they're bringing together here, and I think this might be the reason that they did it in Unreal Engine. I know one of them was talking about the daylight system. I guess the Dragon Engine doesn't do great with daylight, and they wanted an engine that did better with daylight, because I believe the Dragon Engine was more focused on, you know, night, you know, neon lit cities, because that's a lot of what you run into in Yakuza in the evening. It was kind of built for that. That's when the engine really shines. In this case, I think they were talking about how Unreal Engine was better for daytime. And a lot of this game takes place in the daytime. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And you think about all the characters that are in this. You have characters from 7, you have characters from 0, you have characters from 5, you have a character from 3. I'm sure some of these characters got brand new models. But a few of them I have to imagine, including I think the Kiryu / Ryoma model is from Yakuza 5. So I think the reason Unreal lends itself to this kind of game is, and I don't know, maybe this isn't an issue with any of the other engines. It probably isn't. But you're bringing in all these models from all these different games, and they all have to look like they're from the same game, if that makes sense. And I'm sure that really comes down just to, like, textures and visual fidelity in terms of, like, the face scans and everything like that. But you got to remember, Kiryu's not a real person. His face isn't scanned in as it is, like, with somebody like Kuze. So it needs to look realistic enough to sit next to some of these characters that are based on real people. Now, they've done this for a long time. But you're having all these characters from different games together. People from 7, people who've been on the modern Dragon engine, people from the old engine, and you're putting them all together. So maybe, I don't know, maybe Unreal lends itself to that. That was just a theory I had. I have no idea if that's true or not. But overall, I've had a lot of fun with this game. And I think one of the big parts of that is just how, these characters are a little bit divorced from who they are in the game. So there have been a few moments, and it's not very often. Ryoma is basically Kiryu. But every now and then, you'll see Ryoma do something, and you'll think, see, that's a Ryoma attribute. That's not a Kiryu attribute. Kiryu wouldn't do that, but Ryoma would. A lot of times, it's fairly subtle things, and maybe I'm wrong entirely, but, like, I'll see him in certain situations, and I'll think, no, I don't think Kiryu would be that selfish, or this, that, or the other thing. But for the most part, I mean, they're obviously based on their original characters. Like, for instance, the florist, he's basically the same guy, except in this case, he's, like, the bath keeper. And he still deals with information and stuff like that. So it's not like they're that much different than their originals. Majima is just as crazy in this version. Some of them are a little more ruthless in terms of being killers, which is kind of an interesting aspect. I mean, this game, from what I understand, I mean, Ryoma is, at least from what I can tell, I mean, he's killed people. So that's a little different than Kiryu. He's at least stabbing people, like, very deeply with his katana. So I know he's done crazy things in the Yakuza games, but I feel like Ryoma doesn't necessarily have the same exact code of ethics as Kiryu. I feel like it aligns pretty close. For the most part, he wants to be a good guy, but it feels like Ryoma doesn't really have a problem with killing those who do wrong. So there's that slight difference there. Okay, so I've said a lot of stuff about all the different systems and aspects of the story and game. Overall, I feel like this game is worth it to check out, especially if you're a hardcore Yakuza fan. More than likely, you've probably already picked it up. At the same time, I don't feel like this is one that you need to absolutely, like, get right away. It's probably one that, if you don't have the money right now, you can wait on a little bit. I'm sure a few months from now, you'll be able to see it up for, like, $35. Whether it's a sale on the PlayStation Store, or maybe you find a used copy at GameStop. You could probably wait on it. I mean, if you've waited this long for Ishin and you didn't import it, you could probably wait a little bit longer. I understand that there's a lot of games that have been coming out that people have probably spent their money on between you know, Fire Emblem at the beginning of the year. You got, you know, Hogwarts that had just come out. You got Resident Evil 4 remake around the corner. Plus, you know, all sorts of other games in between. So I totally understand if this is not really a priority for you. So I don't necessarily think, unless you really are hardcore into the series or really just want a taste of something different and you're in the mood for a Yakuza game, then you can maybe check it out. But I don't think you have to rush to get it. I think you could probably wait a little bit for it. But I will say it's worth playing. It's definitely worth checking out. I'm pretty far in the story. I have not completed it. I don't want to say this is like a hard review of the game because, you know, I haven't completed it. I haven't checked out all the systems, but I've had a good bit of fun with it. That being said, it does make me hungry for more Yakuza. And as far as we know, we have another game coming out this year, unless that gets delayed, which is going to be the Yakuza Gaiden, I think, or Like a Dragon Gaiden. The man who lost his name? I can't remember. It's something like that. Basically, it's the story of Kiryu between 6 and 7 and kind of what went on between there. And I would not be surprised if it gives us a little bit of a prologue leading into 8 and Kiryu's story there. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm really excited to see. I don't know if we're going to get to see more of that soon. I have no idea when to expect that. I assume closer to the end of the year. It seems like RGG Studio is really running themselves ragged with all of these projects. So that's going to about do it for today, guys. I'm having a fun time with this game. So if you guys do get to check it out, if you're into it, let me know what you think below. I'm sure I got a few things a little wrong because I'm mostly going based off of my memory. But I really like Yakuza Ishin. So again, let me know what you think below. Thanks, guys, and I'll talk to you later soon.